size 3.
Okay, now we're looking for a Karimuchi size 3.
This one or the little one?
This is a Koi Show.
Oh, it's a Koi Show. Wait, let me find that one. Okay, that's down here, size 3.
Was that on the floor?
So now we're looking at the Koi Show. What you talking about?
Right. This was a size 4, the larger Koi Show.
I have a size 4 Koi Show and I have a size 3 Koi Show.
All right, the smaller one is the ones I'm more concerned with.
That's it.
That's this one right there.
Yeah, but let's just measure them.
Possibilities with that.
Yeah,
Okay, this
we're
one
just going to
says-
measure them all real quick
This is
just
the
to be
Muchi,
sure.
right?
No pollution.
That's good. Let me go get another net. Thought we were good. The next biggest one.
Yeah. You spread the tail more?
Yeah, spread the tail.
Yeah. Okay, under 40.
Under 40 is a size 3.
That's what you want. You want
Okay.
it as big as you can in the one size class.
When you spread the tail, you measure the narrowest or the longest?
No, the longest part.
Okay.
When you spread the tail, it actually makes the fish shorter.
No, on longfin we measure to the base of the tail.
Okay.
Now watch this.
And I think I would just go ahead and put it in the regular.
Put it in the shell class. Because then it would go under Ginrin A if it were you going to put it in Ginrin.
Well, I didn't know if he had lost the scale and that was a little bit of his flesh showing.
No. That's just
Well, doesn't that
that's
take him
just-
out of show class?
no.
Size 5.
I have 5 fish.
What size in size 5?
56 centimeters.
Once you see the trophies,
As long as I get one. I probably won't get any.
you may have to have one mailed to you. That forum that didn't
Alright.
show up.
This is size 5.
Size 5.
Put that tail down.
You ain't no way you're going to
Give me a pair of scissors.
Here, look.
It's a 5. It's a 5.
Baby.
I was going to fold the tail for him.
The beauty.
You got that picture?
Got it.
We're all set.
That fish looks so great in the
Got
pond
'em all?
against
have
the black
4.
background.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Isn't that gorgeous?
It's kind of like it's not
What you want to do is go on the internet.
Oh, that's no fair.
We've got a very active group in Naples, South Carolina. We meet once a month.
Turn on that one all the way back too.
I know.
Well,
On a show, that's
what
just
about
so
this? You get
impressive.
5 answers. Pick the one you like.
Very.
absolutely. Yeah, well,
But there is a limit based upon
accomplishment to the GIN. But what we really want to do is assess the GIN to make sure it's orderly, it's got good coverage, and that would be part of that coverage. And then look at the underlying animal as well. One of the problems that you see in this show is you see killer GIN on a fish with terrible flaws as a variety, and you
again, going all the way to the tail is a bit unusual, isn't it? I mean, it's that uniform all the way through the tail.
It's good coverage,
To
no
the tail.
question.
Right.
And as a specimen of its variety, it's fine. There's some two-tone in the color. That's the only negative in that fish.
These are probably. It's coming.
It's coming our way.
It's a shape. It's a perfect shape. It really does.
Perfect concept there.
Right.
At first you starve us to bring us here, and then you won't give us any treats while we're here.
Yeah, these are world class. They're really nice. All right. No more of these?
Yeah. Thank you for putting them so close together.
All right. Some thoughts, some comments? You don't have to make a decision. Just give us your thoughts about the different fish.
White on this fish is much cleaner. There's a slight yellowish hue to the white on the other
And I
fish.
think the gin ring actually helps this fish a lot in that area.
Even
but
on the
it's-
face,
yeah.
you can see the difference in the shell.
Good point.
The sumi is thicker on this fish than it is on the other one. This one benefits from being in shade a little bit more with the lighting. You can, you can see the benny through some of the sumi fish.
Yeah, well, there's always a battle between the sumi and the beni when they overlap like that. When these fish get these huge, expansive bodies, unless they have really thick coloring, but you know, they're both
Yeah, they're both exceptional.
exceptional specimens. Yeah, I think it's a case of
The
a
luster is incredible.
Your thoughts?
Tail tube is impressive.
Well, I agree with Papa. I think that the ease of the Benny's thicker on this fish. Assuming is seems just a touch thicker.
How about the bone structure? The shoulder, the head.
This one, to me, seems just a bit more bulky in the front third of the fish than the other one.
So really, that's rarer. To have a fish that can get to that size with that bone structure is considered special because not many fish at all can get to that level. The other one has a very strong backbone. It doesn't have that width to the shoulders or the skull. Well, it sounds like we're favoring the fish. You want to talk about colors before we actually make a decision?
This is a little lighter persimmon feed, which tends to make you think it's a little thinner. but it's uniform.
It's an attractive pattern, there's no question. Bob and I had talked about the problem a show has when it's Sumi and Black and Benny mix, that there's a battle going on. And frequently you'll see little speckles of Sumi start to appear, and it's really a look to show, not a fault. But it becomes a challenge when you have a fish that has its three colors isolated. It always gives a stronger pop to the fish.
But if you look just at the shoulder structure on this one compared to the other, it's just definitely weaker of the two, through the shoulders.
You get a perfect conformation. A fish like this, to be able to carry that weight and not be a little belly heavy is unusual. It's got it, particularly for a shower. All right, well, it sounds like we have a winner. So of our group here, who chooses this as the first place size 7 shower?
I'd vote for this one.
Okay. So, our first. That is.
That's into Bob.
Sumi changes when it goes in shadow versus the sun.
Yeah, you can still see.
I'm Dick Thomas from Lafayette, Indiana. I started out in a hobby about 11 years ago, like most of us did, with just a water garden. After a year or so, I got more interested in the fish and less interested in the plants. So we redug the pond, and we went from 3,500 gallons to maybe 6,000 gallons. And 2 years later, I found out I was still doing things wrong. So finally built a real koi pond with 3 bottom drains and 14,000 gallons and a much better filtration. So that was probably in 8 or 9 years ago, and really got hooked. We've been to Japan 8 times looking for fish. We go back almost every year. We just thoroughly enjoy the culture, the Japanese culture, as well as the fish and riding the trains. Well, we show at 2 or 3 shows every year, usually Louisville, a couple of shows in Chicago, and just got to meet a lot of the judges, acquainted with them, and then I was asked if I wanted to join the judging program. I gave it some thought. I thought I had a tremendous amount I needed to learn yet before, but they said no, try it. So this is my 3rd show to judge, and I do enjoy it. It's a challenge, it really is.
Looking for the battle of finish versus no finish. If we were in a Japanese show, the finished fish is 99% of the time always going to win because they're equal neck and neck on finish. Tate groups, future type fish or unfinished fish don't usually show up at the show until the following year. We're left in America with the decision of, do we just pick a finished fish over a fish of higher quality that isn't quite finished yet? There's some leeway in size 1 because they're so young, but there's a limit. We have to be judicious about how we decide. So you want to go first, Dick?
Okay, well, we got to see which fish is. We need a number.
You want a number? Which one's which? The show here in Florida, all 3 of the judges, Bob Rudd from Chicago and Jim Riley from New Jersey, we just can't grow fish up north like you folks do down here. We were just blown away with the size of the fish because people are buying fish at 20 and 22 inches and growing them to 30 and 32 inches. And they're not just long fish, they have massive bodies on them. And we just can't do that up north. I don't know if it's water, it has to be the temperature, I guess, the longer growing season that does that. But you guys have found the secret down south. Grand Champion choice was tough. We had 3 fish that were really close, and it probably took us 15 minutes to run back and forth looking at those 3 fish, and finally the Showa that did win had the massive body size, not just again the length, but through her shoulders. She was just a beautiful bodied fish, full bodied fish, something you would expect to see in all Japan show. probably some of the nicest fish I've ever seen in the States. There was a couple of kohakus that I would love to have swimming in my pond. The shows were nice, but the kohakus are just, the whites and the reds are just spectacular. I do enjoy the kohakus probably a bit more than the Showas, but this Showa was overwhelming. When you really look closely at both of them, the decision was easy after we really studied the fish closely.
Well, I've been a fish keeper all my life. I think from the time of 7, I was fascinated with aquatic life. And I discovered koi. I think I knew about koi from the early tropical fish magazines. But around 1985, I bought my first koi and tried to keep it in an aquarium. And of course, that was an impossible situation. But I was fascinated by the fish, so I kept at it, built my first pond later in 1985, and from there it took on a life of its own. Well, I think like a lot of people, the first time you see a koi, you can't believe the size of it. It's a fascinating collection of colors in a pond when you see several of them together, and that was a big draw. And also the way they move. I think people who love koi recognize that they have a hypnotic way of swimming that just draws you in, and you remain fascinated. And I think the term koi kichi could best be described as a person who finds constant fascination with these fish and watching them swim and move around in the pond. I think koi keeping goes through stages, and you enjoy them, and then if your pond isn't right in the beginning, or you're bought too many fish, you struggle with health problems, issues of that nature, and a lot of people get discouraged. So sure, I've been discouraged on that phase, but if you stay with it, like any hobby, if you love it, you work hard at it, you get better and better, and it gets easier and easier, and then you reach a point where it truly is enjoyable again, like it was, like you thought it would be in the beginning. So I've had my ups and downs, but I always come back to the fish. It's an excellent show. It's a beautiful venue. And what I've noticed with this show and many of the shows on the East Coast is the quality of the fish continues to rise. We all began coming to koi shows with our pond fish. And when pond fish were competing with pond fish, it was a fun exercise, but we weren't learning as much. Now people know what to look for. Dealers are giving them guidance on what to buy. They're learning on their own. And so the fish are becoming better quality. And this show was an example of that. We had 131 fish, of which I'd say over 90 of these fish were true show quality fish. Also, a little venue dorsal, very uniform color, bright. Let's take a second look at this.
Good shoe.
Now, but this is interesting, because we just talked about a finished fish and how uniform the Benny was. And this fish, when you see it in the light, there's a bit of a variation, but it's so bright, the luster is so high, even though it's a small fish. Size 1, we're not looking for a fat fish versus a thin fish, like true adults. We're looking for normal, balanced conformation, which both fish have. So no, just because one's long enough, it doesn't really have an advantage over it. Okay, so we go back here. Grand Champion is, definition, the #1 fish in the show. And so if you consider that, you're looking for presence, you're looking for an impressive animal. That's most likely to come out of the large size fish. And when we came down to the 2 last competitors in the show, not surprisingly, the largest fish won, but not just because it was large. It was actually physically a larger fish in the show, but in quality and in perfection. There was a show in this show that was remarkable. It really won on its rarity, not its size, but you just don't see a large fish like that with the colors of a 2-year-old young fish, because obviously it takes several years for fish to get to be that size. So the show was really an exceptional animal. The kohaku could be a grand champion in any other show, but because the Showa came, not in this show. Well, it's certainly a characteristic, but it's a higher characteristic. So when we look at these fish, as I mentioned earlier, there are pond fish and there are show fish. We start to look for evidence of rarity, those special fish that have been cultivated to have these unique traits. So things like fukurin, which is the shine of the skin around the scales and over the scales, is considered rare and very desirable. So it does count as a big consideration in a show. I'm thrilled that so many people are interested in the hobby. In the early years, it was not as common. People would look at koi and they would say, "Oh, look at those large goldfish." There's greater knowledge, and that's good because it brings in more people to the hobby, which causes the hobby to grow and the business to grow in America. The prices are high, and that is unfortunate. These are animals that are rare. Their siblings are not considered show fish, so you need to produce hundreds and sometimes thousands of these fish just to get one of these show fish here. And that certainly is going to require some expense to buy that animal. But I'd like to see this be a middle-class hobby in America, and some of these bigger fish are quite expensive, so they're not for everybody. Other than that, I think the environment for koi keeping in America is very good, and I think that it enhances any home to have a pond. It's a beautiful, relaxing thing, and that bodes well for koi ponds as well. I think when you do spend a good amount of money on a fish, you're concerned about it, you worry, and if these become pets for people, they certainly worry about taking their pets out into an environment where they've heard that there are maybe diseases, there are parasites to be gotten. Most experts recommend after a show maybe to quarantine your fish for a while, and they may not have a facility like that, so they feel that it's too much of a risk. So koi clubs are good in this regard. They help a person realize that the risk is minimal and that they shouldn't be frightened. But at the moment, it's a bit of a hard sell. You have to go slowly with people when they have a pond full of fish that might be of a value up to $5,000 each or $5,000 total to convince them to bring them out of the safety of their yard. But it's mostly psychological. Well, there's a commercial aspect to that, and of course a businessman's going to do what a businessman needs to do, and then there's meeting the market demand. I think that although everyone loves the big fish, and that is what brings people to these koi shows, the wonderment of these very large fish, they aren't for everyone. So it might be more practical in America to have a male pond. The male fish are naturally smaller than the females in most cases. And so there's a market there for the breeder to produce good male fish that last. Historically, male fish mature quicker and their colors are brighter when they're younger, but they tend to fade with age. But the newer, more modern fish we're seeing, the males can preserve their color and their beauty for 10 years, 12 years maybe. And I would think that would be an area where the breeders would naturally concentrate, and the demand and the breeder motivations would come together. Well, I now have a pond of 12 fish. The fish are between 8 and 17 years old, and they become friends. I used to be a collector of koi, and now I'm a lover of koi, and these are my pets as well as my collection. So I'd say the satisfaction is seeing others getting to a place where I'm at, and there's a kindred spirit that's nurtured in that realization. And I'd say having a pond that's disease-free, where you know how to handle every emergency, and you have friends who know the same, is a lot of satisfaction for me.